The name Sara Baartman, have you ever heard it before? Sara Baartman was one of the most exploited black women in history, and I cannot believe that I had to learn about her from a Twitter thread. Today's video, it's different for this channel, but it's not really different for me. This type of video is something that I used to do on my previous channel. Because it's Black History Month, I thought I would bring a script back that I wrote like a year ago, but I thought that for Black History Month, something like this is needed, and I already had the script. So let me know if you like content like this, because it's harder to do. I must say it takes much longer to do, but if you like this kind of thing, I can kind of sprinkle them in every now and then. So we're starting right at the beginning of her life. And one of the most unfortunate things about Sarah's story is that she never ever got a chance to tell her story herself. It's so bad that even her name given at birth is actually unknown. But this is what I was able to find on Google. Let me just say also that like I said, this is information that I found on Google. My apologies if I butcher the names of anybody, the names of any places. This is a whole different culture of people that we're talking about. So I'm just putting it out there that my intention is not to offend anybody. So please bear with me. So Sara or Sarah G. Bartman was born sometime in 1789 among the Khoi people near the Gamtoos River. The Khoi people are based in South Africa, and they are hunter-gatherers, mainly known for their click language, which is actually still used today. It seems like the tragedy started at the beginning of her life because her mother died while she was still an infant, and her father died when she was a child. Sara was given a tortoise shell necklace to mark her first menstruation. This was a cultural practice for the Khoi people, and she kept this necklace until her death. Sara was believed to have married a Khoi man in her teenage years who was a drummer, and it is also said that she had a child with that man who passed away as a baby. Their husband was murdered by Dutch colonists. The Dutch settlers, they came in the 17th century and they dispossessed the Khoi people of their land. They also brought diseases with them that the Khoi people were not immune to, causing many of them to actually pass away. Because of this, many of the Khoi people were forced to go and live in the cities. Sarah was later brought to Cape Town by a tradesman, Peter Cesar, to be a servant for his brother Hendrik Cesar, who was a free black. In the city though, Sarah's body began to gain a lot of attention. And you might be wondering why, what's so special about her body that gained her so much attention? And this was because she had what was called steatopedia. Let me see if Google can help me with that word. Steatopedia. So she had steatopedia. And what this is a large accumulation of fatty tissue around the buttocks and thighs. And while this was common among the Khoi women, the Dutch settlers found it so fascinating. So Hendrik began showing her at the city hospital in Cape Town, and this is where they met Alexander Dunlop. Alexander Dunlop was a staff surgeon at the General Hospital in Cape Town, and he was also the medical superintendent of the government slave lodge. Both Cesar and Dunlop saw an opportunity to benefit from Sarah's assets, and so Dunlop suggested that they travel to England to exhibit her. Because Sarah was used to Hendrik, she didn't want to go to England without him. But Hendrik at first didn't want to go, but he eventually was convinced and they both went with her. At this point, it is still not known whether she went on her own free will or she traveled as a slave. Some believe that she went because she was persuaded by false promises of wealth. So here's where the story gets a little tricky. Traveling back then was a whole different thing from now. So Dunlop writes the governor requesting that he reissue a pass for Hendrik Cesar, his servant, to travel under his protection with a friend. That friend was Sarah. He stated that he wanted the reissue because they were prevented from traveling earlier because of an illness. The procedure at the time is that requests for permission should be submitted as formalized memorials to the governor. However, there was no initial request for Cesar, and even after this, there is no known request seen for Sarah. Nevertheless, permission was granted for the trip in 1808, and they leave Cape Town for England March 10, 1810. Sara was actually the first Khoi woman to travel to Europe. However, when they got there, Dunlop tried to sell her with the quickness, but the buyer refused to buy her. But Dunlop wasn't really that bothered because he knew that he could make bank exhibiting Sara, especially because Londoners were not used to anyone that looked like Sara at all. And so the show was born. The freak show, as they called it, for 2 shillings per person. One could go down to 225 Piccadilly Street between the hours of 12 to 4 p.m. to view what was described as the greatest phenomenon ever exhibited in the country, the Hottentot Venus. And even the name suggests that they weren't just fascinated by her rather large buttocks, but it was something much worse. The word Hottentot was used specifically to refer to the Khoi people. The term was coined by Europeans who, after discovering the Khoi people, they couldn't understand their language and they described it as a stammer or a stutter, which is actually the meaning of the word Hottentot. The Europeans also viewed the Khoi people as barbaric, not having any real language or religion, and also describe them as the missing link between human and animals. These are the same people who brought various diseases to these people's land that caused them to die. Well, okay, the body of the Khoi woman was of particular interest to them. Dubbed the Hottentot apron, the labia minora of the Khoi woman was rumored to be excessively elongated, resembling that of apes. So because of this, they marketed Sara as the missing link and not entirely human herself. And just to note, while doing my research, I realized that the term Hottentot is now a derogatory phrase, and so is every other phrase that uses that word in it. Not surprisingly, the show in fact reflected the way that they thought about her. Although she refused to be shown in the nude, she was displayed wearing skin-tight clothing that had a similar color to her skin tone to mimic her nudity. Her dignity was erased completely. She was poked with fingers and sticks. She was forced to emerge from a cage like an animal, and if she didn't want to perform, she was threatened with whippings. The show nevertheless continued to gain popularity, and this was both a good and a bad thing for Dunlop and Cesar. The patrons continued to roll in, but the show caught the attention of the African Association in Britain. The African Association, led by Zachary Macaulay, opened a case against her employers, stating that her inhumane treatment was not one that was befitting of the British society. Just as a little side note as well, Dunlop and Cesar were referred to as her keepers in a few documents. Sara's was not the only freak show. Freak shows were actually very popular back then. Remember, they didn't have TVs. And so they both argued that they had the right to be exhibited just as any other freak show that existed. However, to imply that Sara was treated or seen as equal to the other Caucasian freaks that would have existed back then is totally false. The Khoi people, especially the Khoi women, were viewed as beastly savages to these people. And this is far different from what might be seen as a one-off exception to the norm that might be like someone who's hairy or someone with dwarfism. It's definitely not the same. The African Association moved to have Sara removed from their custody on the grounds that she was not lawfully in their custody in the first place, and they believed that she was being exhibited against her will. So the court ordered that the coroner and attorney of the court, that is the Attorney General, and 2 other persons that they all approved of, conduct an interview with Bartman in her home without Dunlop or Cesar's present. During the 3-hour-long interview, Sara gave damning evidence in favor of her keepers, stating that she was treated kindly and she was in want of nothing. She, however, refused to answer when she was asked if she would like to stop being exhibited. In addition, her keepers also refused to answer when asked about the permissions given for Sara's travel. Dunlop and Cesar's were also able to produce a contract signed by Sara agreeing to be exhibited, and this was used to confirm that she came to England on her own free will. Mind you, Sara couldn't read or write. So there were ultimately little to no consequences for the 2 men, and the exhibitions continued. In fact, the publicity of the case caused the show to gain more attention and popularity, and so they continued to tour England and even went into parts of Ireland. So random, but on December 11, 1811, Sarah was baptized, and some records even show that she got married that day. To this day, the groom is still not confirmed. The record keeping in that time, as you know, would not be the best. And so after 1812, we don't really hear much more about Sarah. The next thing we hear about Sarah is that she was brought to France and sold to an animal trainer called Jean Roux. Hope I'm pronouncing these names right. The rules against slavery were not as strict in Paris at this time, and so Sarah was essentially sold into slavery in Paris. Just like in England, her shows in Paris were a hit. She would perform at private parties for the rich and even did some shows at the Palais Royal. Even though while she was in England, she refused to be displayed in the nude, here, all she wore for her performances or her exhibitions was a loincloth that only covered her genitals. And some even say that here in Paris, she was also prostituted. She also caught the attention of Georges Cuvier, um, not too much on me, a French naturalist and zoologist, and this man sought to study her as proof of the superiority of the Caucasian race. Sarah's popularity waned after Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo, which led to an economic depression in France. And just like that, after only a little over a year in France, Sara Baartman died. She died of an unknown illness, alone and extremely poor. Georges Cuvier got permission to dissect her body. And I'm guessing, like me, you probably were thinking, okay, they didn't know what caused her to die, so they probably are trying to find out what her cause of death was. No, not the case. What he wanted to do was to dissect her to confirm their theory of her and other Khoi women being the missing link. A cast was made of her whole body, her skull and skeleton were preserved, and her brain and genitalia were embalmed. And the findings of Cuvier's research was that the Khoisan people were actually humans, but they possessed many characteristics of apes, and therefore he determined by this that the Caucasian race was superior. However, we already know that he decided in his mind what his answer would be, what his conclusion would be, far before he ever even thought of dissecting Sarah's body. After years of negotiation between South Africa and France, her remains were finally brought back to her homeland in 2002, as well as the body cast. And to date, the whereabouts of her brain and genitalia are claimed to be unknown or destroyed. What a sad, sad life to live. If she was actually born in 1789 and they said she got to France in 1812, spent a little over a year there, that means she was only alive for 24 years. Only 24 years. And this is the life that she lived. It seems like her life just started out and continued as a tragedy. What do we think about the idea of her not being a slave but going to England on her own free will? What do we think of that? To me, that's false. To me, that's definitely false. How do you try to sell a free person as soon as you get to the country? That doesn't make sense. She was definitely a slave, and she might have been persuaded or probably persuaded not to make to be alarmed or not to make a fuss about going to England, because they promised her that maybe they told her that she would be free in England. Was she not already free? I did this research a year ago. Maybe they told her that this is a foreign country, a lot of opportunities. She would be a free woman in England and she would get to make money. But there, even if she was told that, their intention was to have her as a slave. The case that they had with her and Cesars and Dunlop, how do you accept a signed contract from a person who could not read or write? Like, how I don't get. Why would you accept that as evidence? Where she did go wrong is she defended them. So I think at that point there was nothing that they could actually even do. And this is why it's always beneficial to you to not hide your feelings. You need to speak up. This was a whole different time, I know. And maybe at that time she thought that she was doing what was best for her. How do you think it would be different if she decided to say, you know what, actually, I'm not okay? Do you think she would actually be free? Would it be real freedom to be in a country you know nothing about, with the people who you came there with would no longer be on your side? You'd in essence be alone in a foreign country. I think it would be a little better for her. Maybe she could even have lobbied to be sent back to her country. I don't know, because even there it seemed like she didn't have anybody. Did she have siblings? I don't think I learned if she did. But I would love to hear your thoughts on this. The story of Sara Baartman is one that we don't talk about enough. This is a story that we all should know. I have never asked you to subscribe to my channel, but I would really like it if you do subscribe. And if you like this type of content, let me know, because I can, like I said, I can sprinkle a few more videos like this. Maybe not all the time, because like I said, this took me a long while to do this research. This is only a piece of the things that I was able to find, and I tried to put the most important things in the video. Let me know what you think. I would really love to hear your thoughts on this video.